Hey, how's it going? It's Sid Greenwood, and I'm just doing kind of like the video overview of the Group 2 presentation on our kind of AI systems and specifically how kind of it's all implemented in our companion here. So real quick, I'll just run through kind of all the features it has, and then finally at the end talk about how like the kind of AI logic and the automatic parts of this are implemented. First, we'll just start with kind of the most necessary thing, which is, your map and units. There's nothing really related to the AI in terms of the map specifically, so I won't go too far into it. But essentially, the map is just made up of a bunch of tiles that can hold a bunch of information about units and the tile itself. So we can then take this framework of the map and allow things like AI pathfinding and actions through the map. So once we have a map, we need to make a unit. So the units and their abilities are done through scriptable objects. So we'll just start with a little demo here. We'll make a test folder for our abilities and our units. And let's just go ahead and create a unit here. We'll do a mech unit. So this comes in as a new mech unit. We can go ahead and arrange it how we'd like. So we can do a visual model, the general stuff like health and movement range, team, mech type, and then there is dynamic information that can get set, such as things like status effects and counters, because that was a really big part of gameplay and ability play. Additionally, we can see what that would look like for an alien, and it's just slightly varied with a lot of the same information, but since aliens need to be able to choose their own abilities, there's a section to slot abilities for an enemy type. So if we look at ones that already exist, for example, this would be EG1, a grunt. A bunch of information like its health and movement range already set up here, and then the abilities in the form of scriptable objects. Now, what are those ability scriptable objects? Well, same process here. We can go ahead and create a combat ability. And abilities have a type, offensive, defensive, counter, or support, a range, modifications for like an area effect, a roll range, because that's how the clash dynamic works, and then a bunch of modifications for winning or losing, and things like adding a status effect or different behavior depending on the ability type. So once we have a set of units and abilities made, we can go ahead and actually play the game here. Okay, so let's go ahead and here and place some units. These are all just abbreviated for ease, but you can click on a tile and then place a unit. And I may or may not be jumping through this tutorial, just time skipping, so you don't have to see me doing all the actual placement information. Now here for the aliens, one thing to talk about is if it was totally dynamic, we would have the aliens spawn themselves. Currently it doesn't work, but how that would work is depending on if it's a grunt, a brute, a tank, a sniper, or a support, it would likely be placed in a certain radius, both in terms of range away from other units and from the hive here. Supports, and snipers would probably be grouped up in the middle, and then as you go out, you'd get, what would it be? It would probably be a bunch of like grunts, and then brutes, and then kind of snipers kind of in the mix. So, all right, now that we have a map set up, play would ensue. So essentially, now that everything is placed, each team, so it would be player 1, 2, 3, 4, and then aliens would get a turn comprised of a certain amount of actions. For the players, they get 4, I believe, and for the aliens as a whole, they get 8. So now if we just go through and we click on units, we can see, okay, what's its name, its team, its type, because that will help indicate what types of moves it has available, its current health, its current move range, because movement range can get affected by things like status effects, any artifacts that it would be holding that would drop when it dies, and then status effects as well. So just for reference, let's do some remembering here. This A1B has a move range of 2, and then the A1A has a move range of 3. The Grunt has a move range of 2, Tank has a move range of 1. So let's do some movement. How this works is you click on a unit and then release where you'd like to go, and it autonomously finds a path towards that location. If we try to find a spot to somewhere that doesn't exist, it doesn't work. But other than that, if we want to go towards this grunt, it finds the most optimal path, and then we can move the unit along that path. I believe this one had that movement range of 2, so you're only ever going to see it go that far. And of course, if we wanted to go past the unit, it automatically knows not to go through the unit, but to go around it. So let's move this way a little bit, and then we'll move this unit towards where we want to go. Now that we're in a position to clash, let's talk about how that works. So, there's a lot of kind of just debug information and not very pretty information, but I can run through what it all means. First, if we were a player, we would want to initiate something. So let's say we want to as A1A. We'll set the initiator, we'll click on the target, and we'll set the target, and now we know we can start doing ability selection. Now, for ease of demonstration, for the mech abilities, I just listed them all here, and how it would work is players, from their decks of moves that they have, would select the one they want to use. It makes sense here to use an offensive move, so we'll do the EMP bullet. And now this process button opens up because, hey, we can use an offensive if we'd like. Now, what the alien would have to do is it would have to decide what it wants to do back. So we have this button here, alien auto. So now the alien decided to use a poison spray, which is an offensive back. However, if we cycle through here, we can see that it will use a defensive option as well. Hardened skin is a defensive move. So let's go through and just click, and we'll see that it never chooses anything that's not viable. By not viable, I mean the fact that if you are using something like, let's go ahead and switch to something that's more defensive. So this block right here, we see that process doesn't work. That's because it doesn't really make sense to initiate with a block against something if you're attacking. So now the alien, if it were to respond again, knows that, okay, well, it's blocking. I can't block back. That really wouldn't do anything. So I'm going to respond with something offensive. Chomp, tentacle slap, poison spray. Those are the options that this alien has. So let's go ahead and process that. And all right shows the initiator and the target, the abilities they choose, the roles, and then inherently the winner. Let's go ahead and do another example. Let's set the target as the player, and the initiator as the player and the target as the alien. Let's initiate with a counter. Now, counters are something that only work against an offensive move. So again, alien is going to choose something offensive. So we'll go ahead and process that. The winner was A1A because they rolled higher, so they would get the counter effect. So after that, there is some more kind of automatically determined logic at play. So there is range for abilities. So as A1B, let's be the initiator, and then let's set the target as the alien. Let's try to use something that would be a melee, so Gashing Blade, and this does not let us process because it knows the range wouldn't work. If we switch to something like an EMP bullet that's ranged, it works. However, again, there is some more logic in terms of if we were to move this unit. Let's clear this so we can move. Alright, so I just had to do a bit of jumping, but picking back off where we were leaving off, talking about range attacks, there are also checks for things like line of sight and range. So if we were to move our unit further away, and we wanted to try something like a melee attack, it would not work, it wouldn't let us process it. If we tried something like a sniper shot, however, it would, because we have a lot of range on that attack. But then again, an EMP bullet, which is ranged but doesn't have as much range, wouldn't work, so we couldn't do it. That's most of the inter-team interactions. Essentially, how this works is based on the ability type, certain moves are and aren't viable. Other than that, there is inter-team action as well. So these ESPs are supports. So let's clear this current interaction. If we were to move next to what would be a friendly unit to an alien as a support, and we want to clash, with the support as an initiator and the friendly alien as a target, if we were to do this alien auto, now this is a completely automatic interaction. We don't have to do anything. And the support chose barrier, healing aura, camouflage, anything essentially that is marked as a support ability. Barrier would give them stacks of the barrier status effect, healing aura would just heal, and then camouflage would give them the invisibility status effect. Notice here as well that the enemy grunt isn't responding with anything. It doesn't have any support actions, and it doesn't make sense to respond with a slash back at your own team. Other than that, that's most of the logic at play. All that's left is really the enemies being autonomous and moving themselves. Something I just couldn't get working in the demo, but the logic is already prepared for that. So essentially how this will work is that given that this is a hive mind type of enemy, we can go through all the enemies and get information from them and then essentially grant them actions as the hive. So each enemy would report all the information that's valid to the determining what they would do, and then all that information in terms of what each enemy could do would be sent back to the hive as a list of options, and then it would be picked from. These would be things like range checks, line of sight checks, class objective weights. So am I support? Do I want to maybe go towards friendly units rather than enemy units? Viable movement, like hey, is my pathfinding blocked? Health checks, and then of course, which actions are on cooldown, which ones are viable, and etc. Due to the nature of how moving and using actions would change the landscape of the land, this would be done iteratively. So we would have some sort of action counter for both players and aliens, and as the alien units moved and attacked, actions would be taken down as each one was taken, the grid would be updated, and then movement options would be reassessed until no more actions are left. All in all, that's the companion, and hopefully it does a good job of demonstrating how our systems work and shows how a lot of the logic can be internalized and automated for quicker play.